Hello, people. Oh no, there's only two of us. What the hell is happening? We are off this week and off for the next couple of weeks. And I was thinking through it. And since this is a campaign playtest, I thought it would be fun to do a little design diary for people who are interested in how this game is developing behind the scenes as well with whoever is free. And that is Michael Van Vleet here, our guest star for the Blood Banks of Terranor. I'm totally in podcast voice mode right now as opposed to my normal chatty casualness. But yeah, we're here to kind of chat through some of what's been going on in the campaign playtest, the way the game is working, isn't working, all of that kind of thing. Um, I'll throw it to you, Michael, to kind of like start us off as our
Mhm.
guest star, like coming in. And you've played a lot of the heist that we're going to play the next time we meet, which is going to be Stug Cabeo's Crime Palace. We mentioned is
Mhm.
kind of like the signature Planet Raygun heist.
Right.
And um, you've played that a lot. You wrote Death Race to the Skull Star, and I've played that a few times.
Mhm.
And I think you've also played the Busted Nowhere a few times. But this
Mhm.
was, as far as we can figure, your first time playing Blood Banks of Terranor. It was my second time running it, and this was an entirely new version of it. I guess not entirely new version of it. But yeah, like how did the like mystery feel within the scope of like what else we have within Planet Raygun, all of that kind of thing? Like as you coming into this, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I think the way that it has evolved is very fun. I think that you're really starting to key in on what makes a heist exciting, and that's having every layer of the onion feel different
Hmm.
insofar as the the sets that are inside there. I mean, obviously the NPCs are always top notch wherever you encounter them, but here it felt like we had a different visual tone as we passed through the different layers, which was super fun. And I know that you had talked about wanting to increasingly add late heist complications and
Right.
unlocks that could happen where you're like, if the crew is doing really well, you grab the thing, you're getting out. Oh, now everything you were planning on has been interrupted by this other thing you could not possibly have foreseen when you were in the planning stages of the heist, as the top notch space thieves that you are, ready for everything, but you couldn't have seen in this example that a formerly derelict ship was going to take flight and begin bombarding the city that you are trying to escape from. On the one hand, great distraction, would have been nice to have had that as part of the plan. But when you are also potentially on the receiving end of the bombs and all you want to do is go home, but the power is out and everything's on lockdown, yeah, just the stress skyrockets, which was a ton of fun.
It was a really tricky decision on doing that because I don't like with Carve from Brindlewood stuff, you generally want to be pretty transparent with people. And so you don't want these kind of like hooky surprises kind of things. And especially in the way that like the heist is structured, I want you to be able to kind of like plan forward to be able to say
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, there's this objective. We've got these assets that we want to save, ideally like save for like that particular objective or that particular obstacle. So I tried to with this kind of like surprise twist version of like what could happen in these like mid-campaign heists is to still have enough that like you can still plan around it. Like I'm not going to completely pull the rug out from underneath your feet, but then that's where I got that idea of like let's just add it on as an option of like
Yeah.
you can also like we're going to add more like visual flair to what's going on in the scene, but um the option on whether to confront it or not is something that is up to the players as an added bonus. I think
Are
the
you,
tricky. Oh,
sorry,
good.
just to jump in, do you think that there are people who might run the scenario and not use that element? Or are you seeing like no matter what, everybody's definitely including the bombardment of the city?
The text is like implying pretty heavily that you just do it.
Yeah,
I think you could, right? Like that's been the conversation in a lot of the discourse lately is people just go and do whatever they want to do with
sure.
RPG stuff. So, um, reasons that you might. I guess that's the tricky thing is like why wouldn't you add it?
Yeah,
And I think like in our particular run of it, we never went to the Lazarus to figure out what was going on there.
the
But
name
I
of the
think it
ship that
becomes
did the
even
bombardment. I mean,
yeah.
everybody watching, of course, already watched the episodes. They know, but
Um, but I think it becomes even more impactful if you have gone there. That
mhm,
said, if you do something that makes it not make sense for the Lazarus to come back, I think that that would you could just write it out. Like it's not necessary
sure.
here at all.
Hmm.
Um, one of the things from a play, like it brings up from a playtest standpoint that I sort of realized running it is that we ended up making the Terranors like very unsympathetic in how things developed. I don't think that that is always going to be the case. There's some flaws and exploits which are there's actually like a union strike is like one of the flaws that those the greeters, so that first woman that you met, like are all like essentially being exploited by the blood board, and
Sure.
so they are unionizing, and that's one way that you can try and like sneak into the dome is like by essentially like creating a labor strike. um,
Hmm.
it's surprising that Jane Doe 2.0 did not dig into that, but she was, yeah, she was in another area where that wasn't really relevant.
Too
Um,
busy trying to become a vampire.
yeah. The the other big change that I had made to the writing of this was, yeah, I think to your point, like really leaning into like differentiating the two
Hmm.
halves of it. The premise was always like, I want the beginning to feel more like Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires. And then the joke is like, once you go into this dome, then it's just gothic silent film era like vampires, and but then having those two things work together and then in the end kind of like collide into one big story is kind of the premise, and then pulling some of the satirical like real world stuff in there of like the that big seed bank that's in, is it in Denmark? We were just talking about
Somewhere
Denmark.
in Northern Europe. Norway,
um
maybe?
Wherever it is. um
Leave it in the comments if you look up where the seed bank is.
that, and then the startup company that we have kind of lifted the name for the planet from, as well. Um, the one of the other things. Oh, so we've had over the course of the campaign, there's a lot of like shift in who's playing and what weeks and what sessions and that kind of thing. And that is broken down to we've had two heists. We're running shorter sessions. Normally, a heist should be able, like, it's probably about 4 hours to get through a heist, right? And so we're running like hour and a half effectively sessions. So it's about there as far as time is concerned. Um, but yeah, we've had varying numbers of people, and that's partly why we've like pulled you in, is to make sure that like we keep the campaign playtest going. How has
Hmm.
that like felt? Because you've experienced that over the past like three sessions too, of
Hmm.
like having like a different configuration of people. I've been thinking a lot about like what I might need to do or how the system is
Hmm.
conducive to that, and then what are some things that I might do in the actual text to like improve on that. Have What's your feeling on it?
Yeah, I think you're in luck in that people getting busy and dropping in and out still suits the heist framework genre wise. Like, you may not realize it, but when you have a personal life emergency, you drop out, one of your friends jumps in, that could have been planned in the heist, that one of
Mm-hmm.
you does your part and then somebody else picks up the ball and rolls with it. So I think the game can definitely support that sort of drop in, drop out thing. I think the only point of friction that I felt there was around Bond dice,
Yeah, yeah.
because the game over the course of the campaign, right, is sort of dependent on you getting to know each of these characters better and also getting to know their relationships with each other better. And drop in, drop out undercuts that a little bit, which is, again, genre wise, it's interesting because you may actually have to depend on someone in the underworld that you don't know that well. You just trust in the reputation of they are a fellow criminal and they have their own bona fides that prove that they can be trusted. If they couldn't be trusted, people would stop working with them, right? Or they would be in prison or dead. So having someone just show up because you need their expertise in fiction, I think is fine. But yeah, I think the person who's dropping in is missing one of the key game components potentially,
Yeah.
unless you stop and like really quick try and get a okay, but what's your relationship to each of the players who showed up this week, which I feel like is a drag on
Right, right.
momentum. So I don't know what you're going to do about that, but that was about the only place where I felt there was a friction for the drop in, drop out.
And it's definitely the thing where like I felt like I was like improvising how it should play out. And I think I made the decision because it's the quick decision, at least in the third session or second set, whatever it was, to just like not have the bond dice for those characters
Yeah.
and to allow bridging the void if people wanted to pursue that. That said, we're like really early on, so people are still getting like familiar, and the vulnerable move tends to be a move that like not that it's an advanced move, but like it's
Mm-hmm.
a move that like I feel like you need a few sessions, you need a few mysteries before that becomes a thing that A, you really desire,
Mm-hmm.
or you have a survival need for, right? Like your
Yeah.
conditions have got up to a point where like, oh, I do need to do something. What can I do about this? Oh, there's this vulnerable move. Let me try this vulnerable move. And then at that point, like you see players pick it up and use it more and that kind of thing. Um the Yeah, so it's tricky. Like I don't know if there should maybe be there's that old concept in PBTA of like the love letter of
Mm-hmm.
like a prompt that is essentially like asking the player like where have you been? And maybe there's something like that that is essentially like it could be an appendix within the book that's
Yeah.
it's just like here are a bunch of like love letters and maybe general topics so they can be reused heist to heist and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially just a like a one block overture kind of thing that ties into generally the action of a heist. So a
Mm-hmm.
sort of like, you know, who did you find in this setting that distracted you from pulled you away from the main action of the heist, and then the initial player like answers that question and there's a prompt for each of
To
the
come
other
back
players.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think by the same function, you could probably do a guest star move that allows them
Hmm.
to create maybe a smaller pool of bond dice to say when you feel like you know your relationship to one of the existing campaign characters enough, you could use a bond die with them just to throw it in. Like you don't have to have stuff established, but if you've shared scenes, started having conversations, you're like, oh, I think I my character seems to get along with this character.
Uh-huh.
So without going through the rigmarole of a bond actual like bondi thing, you might be able to be more loose about the assigning, but maybe also not have as many.
That makes me wonder if like I could have just a for the guest star characters if it's just like a bondi with the crew.
Mm,
That it's just a
yeah.
general bondi that can be
Oh, that's
used
nice.
with anybody, but like
Yeah.
the prompt is essentially like, we could, similar to what I was just describing, there's kind of a general like guest star prompt kind of thing that can pop
Yeah.
up as they come into the scene. And then yeah, everybody just answers it and you roll a die and that's you got one then and cool. Like that's a fun thing
Yeah.
that you can do. You can still initiate bridging the void if you want to
Hmm.
like build like a unique one. Like you kind of like I think that would have been interesting and maybe it would still happen. Maybe this transitions to the next thing we were going to talk about. Um is we've got the two curators, and I think everybody really wants to see Fix and Carlisle like interact and like understand like how do two curators like interact with each other because they're very different forms of curator
Hmm.
um and what they're going for and just how eccentric and in which ways they're eccentric.
Hmm.
um but yeah, like I think it would be interesting to get a bridging the void scene with those two characters together. I think that's one of the big things I'm thinking about is like how do I make bridging the void more appetizing? But to go back to what I was just saying earlier, I'm not sure that I might be trying to push it too quickly into this campaign. Like it may just
Mm.
be that like in the next one we will see a couple of those and then in further heists we will see more just as we get our kind of feet under us for the system, that kind of thing.
Do you just think you're not being mean enough in assigning conditions?
That might be it too. Um,
Got to start picking on your players.
yeah. Like I've been kind of running it in the like more classic like PBTA way of just kind of like running the sort of like, oh, you get halfway there, but then there is this complication. The nice thing about conditions is you just give them and you don't have to think about them
Hmm.
until like it comes up situationally. Um, but then yeah, like I originally designed the game so that you could I was like the playbooks were a lot more stripped back, and so it was essentially like a matter of like, yeah, you need to have a traveler because the traveler is always like the core of these stories. Um,
Hmm.
whether it's the heist story and how the traveler is working in, or it is the because they're kind of the everyman, they're the audience. And then in the science fiction stuff, they are the Buck Rogers, Barbarella,
Hmm.
um, Star Lord, like that sort of character, that fish out of water character that is the audience surrogate, but then also
Hmm.
is that point of focus that the story kind of like hinges around. But other than that, it was like, yeah, if you want to have a traveler in Three Machina, that kind of sounds cool.
Hmm.
So do it. But now with the moves giving more like unique character and the bona fides, which I think are still flexible because you're picking different ones and all of
Hmm.
that kind of thing with it. But we've been thinking about with your character becoming a more permanent member of the cast to help us sustain the campaign playtest. It became pressing to bring in couple new personas and one in particular that's been designed. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Fixstitch, which is actually not named after Fix,
It's
but
100% named after a fix. Yeah, we're kind of thinking about how could the character of Fix evolve out of being a curator into being something else. And we're also thinking about sci-fi tropes and character types and what happens if you cross-pollinate the existing playbook characters. What does a mix of 50% of one, 50% of another look like? And so the Fix Stitch started from the seed of what if we cross a royal and uh is it royal and curator?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And the answer ended up being it had to be somebody who's got social stature inherited from the royal, but we decided rather from it being who you are, it would be about what you know. And we were also thinking about the need for because one of the other characters is like mechanic focused, so fixing machines. So we went the other way for balance, and we're like fixing people, but still with a technological edge coming in from the curator's weird collections and stuff. So the Fix Stitch came together to be kind of a cybernetic doctor who has a deep access to perhaps cutting edge, perhaps experimental, perhaps heretical medical research that's available to them for modifying other individuals. Not even necessarily other members of the crew, because one of the central moves we made for them involves using their medical expertise to offer to improve the lives of side characters that are encountered during a heist. And if they actually get them into a safe operating theater and have the time and like fix them up, literally, give them a new cyborg something or other that solves what their particular problem is, then that side character owes a debt and can use whatever enhancement they've been given to help the heist crew. So
Which
it
is a
kind of in,
fun, it's kind of an insertion of the create your own clue concept from other
yeah.
CFB games into this of kind of like create your own genetic modification of this side character that you
Hmm.
are meeting so that you have an extra asset, which
Yeah.
then also like I think all of these characters I think in the between, like all of the characters are effectively villains. And I don't think like this goes that far, but I would say they're all scoundrels, for
Hmm.
sure. Like they all have this sort of like they are in it for. they're doing this very noble thing in being a part of the association, but they are not necessarily doing it for noble reasons. And to
Hmm.
have all these kind of like slightly sinister or sinisterly tinged aspects and moves is kind of fun. Um, and I think the Fixed Stitch ended up being there are two personas that are being worked on. There is the Fixed Stitch, which is the doctor, the healer of the party, effectively. Um, and then there is the Beyonder, who is kind of the outsider character. They come from within the setting of Planet Raygun. There are the spaceways. Is that starways? Starways, whatever we call it. We're still figuring out all of the
Work in progress.
world building stuff, and it's kind of general anyway. But there's the Star Wars, which is essentially like civilized. There are roads here, there are cities, that kind of thing. And then there's Beyond, which is um, yeah, what is beyond that? And then there is the neither, which is neither of those. It's an alternate dimension kind of thing. But so the concept of the beyonder is who is that person who like lives out on that frontier where they don't interact with people. They just have the stuff that they have, and they are constantly like fixing it, improvising ways to kind of like survive outside of any kind of like social realm. But then they're coming back to this world to um get something, to fix something, to resolve some story, before they feel comfortable like fully going out into beyond. So they are kind of like I've been thinking about them as like a MacGyver, that kind of thing. I might shift it now that we've got the Fixed Stitch in more form,
Mm.
and make them lean them a little bit more towards the Han Solo model of that sort of like um, yeah, frontier outlaw, like outlaw and not necessarily breaking the law, but outlaw and outside of the law, kind of character. Anyway, um, the with all the playbooks, and we haven't gotten to see a lot of the moves. We got to see you determine like curator loot, and we got to see Jane Doe 2.0 transform her form.
Hmm.
Is one of the playbook moves, but with the playbook moves for Planet Raygun, I really wanted them to be like these are big, like scene show-stopping moves that you can execute because there's a limited number of times that you're going to be able to execute them in the heist, and just wanted them to be like really blow the scenario out of the water in some ways. And with the Fix Stitch, we had a fun idea. um, do you want to talk through what that was?
Yeah, like everybody likes throwing lots of dice at the table, right? So the fixed stitch, we thought, well, when we were creating the bona fides, we were trying to think of like what are some of the props that visually make them who they are, and it could be like plastic surgery, cybernetics, something like that. And then like where are they specializing? And then at one point we just came up with the idea of like the jar full of pills, this mixed jar full of pills. Who knows what they do? They're obviously very potent. Maybe the fixed stitch knows what they are, but they look like one of those guess the number of jelly beans things. And this was the seed that ended up leading to us coming up with an idea where the fixed stitch is carrying with them. What was the name that you ended up settling on for this drug?
Acceleroid Plus.
Acceleroid Plus, which could be offered to any other member of the heist crew when they need to do something extraordinary. They pop this pill, it unlocks all of their potential, whether they're biologically based, mechanically based, doesn't matter. It's got the molecular juice in it to supercharge them. And how that plays out is for the next roll that they're going to end up making, they can choose however many dice they want to roll for that, which of course greatly increases their chance of success. However, if they roll ones when they throw their fistful of dice, each of those still count in its original function of increasing the watch. Meaning, maybe you entirely werewolf out, jump over a fence, tear through an obstacle, become the Incredible Hulk, become a pile of ooze. Who knows what happens to you when the pills hit? You do that narratively. It's going to draw a lot of attention, but you'll also succeed at the thing that was so important to do that you were willing to take a pill out of a jar from your local Fixstitch and just see what happens.
Um, that was a really fun moment of like, uh, for what it's worth, like when we came up with that, and I was like, oh, it just works. The system is fine. Like the system's gonna do the work for us on this. And people like to just, yeah, like if you want to throw 50 dice, you can throw 50 dice. That's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ones. Like you don't have enough bond dice, in theory, to like negate all of the ones that you are going to roll, but pretty good chance you're going to get a 12 on that. So maybe that's worth it. And just having that sort of like balance within the system is one of those things that makes me feel like, okay, like this, there's a lot that we can play around with the system now, the way that it's set up. And I think that becomes part of the fun of like move design is like, how can I like twist the expectations of the system to do something outlandish like this while at the same time like working within the constraints and really leaning on that for the balance. Um, the
Yeah, it
other
was such a
big,
pleasant surprise to realize we didn't have to come up with a penalty for the
yes,
game balance. Like it was
yeah,
built in.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so we just threw it in as like as the that is the kit ability for this. So like
Mm-hmm.
the other classes have that third item they get to replace with something else, and for the fixed stitch, their third item is always this Accelerate Plus. Um, the other fun move, I always say that things are fun, and I shouldn't say that. That should be your decision. But we thought it was fun, is this move called Death Insurance, and wanted to have like a healing move, like a super dramatic healing move, which is always in any like role-playing game is the revive.
Mm-hmm.
But then what does that look like in a CFB game? That kind of thing. I think it came pretty simple if we just said like, okay, if the keeper is uh and this is the weird thing about the revive, right? Is that it's if I roll two ones, or a two, and the keeper is going to describe this like gruesome, awesome way that my character dies. There's so many times where you're like, I just wish that could stay. I need to keep my character, but I want that to stay. I want that to be the story. And the
Mm-hmm.
fun thing about death insurance is that's exactly what it is. It is just um, the Fixed Stitch gets to choose a character before the heist that they create a duplicate of. And then if that character has a fatal missed roll, you can just then activate that duplicate. I think that was your concept, and then
Mm-hmm.
I just said yes.
Yeah, like we were originally thinking, like, is there just some way to accelerate the condition removal? And it just didn't seem big enough for a defining move for this class. So when we started thinking, like, what sorts of things could a mad scientist do? And it felt kind of, I had been thinking for a while about like the people-sized printers that you see in a lot of
Mhm.
science fiction, where once you reach a certain point, you can completely scan somebody and, in theory, bring them back in their adult form, and then magically they have even the memories. Like somehow you've scanned the exact position of all the firing synapses or something. They figured out how consciousness works in the future. You can hand wave that away. So yeah, I kind of loved this idea of marking one of your fellow heist crew as the most likely to die. Like, you seem to live really dangerously. What if, just in case, we do a full body scan of you so we have you printed and ready to go? And then we also added things like, well, of course, you can't help but tinker. So the fixed stitch also gets to describe a temporary improvement that they implant in the duplicate that adds one to that character stat multipliers or modifiers for the remainder of just that heist. So like it's not going to live forever. Who knows? Maybe clones are unstable. Maybe it's just too expensive to give you a cybernetic thing that works forever.
Well, and this was one of the other funny things is that contrary to the other, the just roll a fistful of dice move, this is one where it was like, okay, there's got to be a lot of like little controls in this to make sure that it works, that it's quote unquote balanced. Not that balance is the biggest thing, but like that it feels equitable, that it feels, and you're not like messing too many things up. And was writing all the conditions and trying to figure it out. And at some point, I was just like, it's a lot of rules, and came up with this concept of the clonical oath, or clonical oath. I don't know how it's pronounced across worlds, that kind of thing. But
Depends on
essentially,
your
just
regional
made
accent.
like what is the code of ethics for anyone who would be operating a duplicator? And the rule then is just your fixed stitch must abide by this code of ethics, like in whatever you do. And so then it's almost like in fiction rules. So it's I shall not activate a duplicate while the source still lives. I shall not make permanent modifications to a duplicate before it is activated. I shall always gain permission from the living source before terminating a source or duplicate. And finally, I shall only refer to a duplicate as the source once it is activated. And these four rules essentially set out all of the conditions. And then you can kind of like play and manipulate those. So, like that third one, I shall always gain permission from the living source before terminating a source or duplicate, is also implying to me that if the keeper has described something that isn't fatal to the source character, that I could potentially nudge them over the edge, as long as I get their permission and say like, hey, like we've got a duplicate ready of you. Can I just put you out of your misery?
Yeah,
Um,
walk towards the light.
yeah, and then that I think is a really like fun narrative moment, that can play out in a lot of different ways depending on who the characters are. So it's a fun way of like adding rules, but having those rules feel fictionally relevant and less complicated, less technical because of that.
Hmm. I love the idea of look, like a look. I'm not carrying you home in this state. You can't walk anymore. We've got to
Please,
get out of here.
please, please just tell me it's okay to finish the job here.
Yep. And this also kind of covers sort of like the stuff that was explored in films like Moon or Mickey 17, where you're like, what are the ethical considerations around having two versions of the same person? How is the legal framework? So the clonical oath, that's how I was raised to pronounce it. On my planet, it was the
Uh-huh.
clonical oath. It helps us sidestep all of that complicated thing by just saying, please don't do it.
And you had
We have
mentioned
not outlined what the consequences are if you break it, but that's the expectation.
that you've been like mulling. This was a character that we were trying to insert into one of the scenarios, whose name is Zas Porto, who was a courier, that was replicated a bunch of times, inspired by Mickey 17. And one of the fun things as we like wrote the clonical oath here is that we realized like, oh, we could kind of turn that sort of Zas Porto scenario into a heist, or like an act within the heist of like, who is that like fixed stitch character who broke the oath and then is essentially like, who is that renegade fixed stitch, and you are going to stop them or get something from them because they have broken a rule that is everyone, even the most nefarious fixed stitches, still align and still follow. So it's kind of fun that like the rules, having these sort of like rules defined by in fiction rules, also then gives us opportunity to tell like more like interesting stories in the future by just kind of like riffing on those things that just come up very naturally in how you play the game. The final thing that I wanted to chat about was just the so one of the things that's been on my mind from a design perspective is campaign hits. And we talked about it at the very beginning, but like for 12 pluses, I just call them in Planet Raygun campaign hits, partly because the effect might be different in different scenarios. So our the game's version of the big man, or the man in the yellow sun mask, is also tied into 12 pluses. We haven't seen that yet because we've only had one campaign hit in the entire game. And so that's something that's weighing on me a little bit from a design perspective of, again, like we had the mini heist, the tutorial heist, and then a full heist. So we're not super far in, but I think I
Hmm.
was counting on us having more than one at 1.5. I was hoping to, but yeah, so I'm a little bit worried that we're not hitting 12s. I don't know if that's an abnormality when it comes to the number of rolls statistically.
Hmm.
Um, but there is something that I'm kind of struggling with of like making sure that we get enough of that like meta campaign plot in. Because yeah, especially with this concept of campaign hits, we've got um, partly the reason that what are called transmissions from the lost sun um, are tied into the 12 plus is you. I don't want to ruin all the surprises, but you will get like these. Essentially, imagine if in public access, the when the big man talks to you, you could use the things that the big man says to you as an asset or a clue for a mystery.
Mm.
Is essentially what it is. So you're kind of getting a another party beyond the mastermind who is providing you information or nudging you towards the big epic finale.
Hmm.
Um, and so it makes a lot of sense from that perspective, but I need more hits
Hmm.
for it to really work. And so that's been a tough thing to balance because there's a lot of ways to avoid danger in Planet Raygun.
Hmm.
Um, between Bond Dice, I'm one of the initial worries was that there wouldn't be enough bona fides for the characters, and I think you're kind of seeing that the limited bona fides are actually offset by the presence of Bond Dice. Um, and also, one of the other things is lower base modification stats. So there's no +2 right out of the gate.
Hmm.
But all that said, that works to not have as many 12 pluses in theory.
Hmm.
So that's something that I'm like thinking about of like, how can I inject more of the sort of like campaign narrative, heist to heist, without,
Forcing more rolls.
yeah, and without like if it's just like when you complete a heist, you also get a campaign hit,
Like a
feels like
post
it
heist
could
stinger could be fun.
you could get too many. Yeah, I mean every heist could have a stinger. Um, there's there's more stingers. One of the things that I wanted to play around with was the idea of in one other playtest series I was playing around with this of actually having the players narrate the stinger. So giving them a prompt the week before. So in that
Mm.
previous campaign, the way that I did it was we had that introduction where the Ghost Emperor picks up the picture that has the traveler and some companion. And then I also gave that player a prompt that said, um, who is that companion and when is the last time that you saw them? I think it wasn't expressly a bona fide, but it essentially like it was a prompt that they would then answer as the stinger for the next session.
Yeah,
And that was Wes Franks, and Wes like killed it. We were
of
just like,
course.
oh shit.
You give Wes time to prepare,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
you're gonna get some magic.
It was their traveler's brother and had been imprisoned by the Ghost Emperor. So we saw like essentially like the torture scene, like not, it wasn't like a graphic
Yeah.
torture scene, but them like strung up with chains and that kind of thing in this cell. Uh, which it might still be fun to play with. I got a little worried about like, are players going to feel comfortable with that? Like one of the things with
Hmm.
Planet Raygun is I want a pretty big wide range of like, I want people who are more familiar with D&D to like feel more like this is a natural thing that it makes sense to them. So thinking about
Hmm.
like those kinds of players and how do we make it conducive for them to kind of roll into this. And so it
Yeah.
felt like it might be a lot of pressure on them at a stage that they're not necessarily ready for that.
To come
Um,
up with a story beat that is super compelling. It's a
yeah.
it's a lot of pressure to perform. Not all of us are a Wes, tragically.
I think a lot. I mean, the people who have like who are already into CFB, I think are
Hmm.
very like tuned towards this, and I like
Hmm.
trust. them all to like come up with real bangers, but
Hmm.
we always hear the stories of, yeah, you always have like that when you're playing with a broader group or a more general group, that there's those players who are just not quite there yet. They're working through a lot in their head. Yeah. So I
Hmm.
don't know, like it's something I'm torn on.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, for anyone watching, if you want to tell us if the math just isn't mathing and that's why there's not campaign hits, go back through all the episodes so far, count up every single one of the rolls, and then just put that total in the comments.
Do it for us. Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. On that note, any other thoughts on the way that the campaign has been going? And
One heist in.
yeah.
Yeah, it's going great. He stole some stuff, got back out, lost
Uh-huh.
an eye. I got to deal with that narratively.
Uh-huh.
But honestly, the fact that we came up with the new playbook actually makes for a super smooth transition. We're like, well, you lose an eye, what are you going to do? I assume if there's a time gap between this heist and the next one, you spend all that time, getting a cyber replacement that's even better. And
Yep.
that's
Yep.
what led to the new job. Well, I'll have to figure out like where does that leave Fix's obsession with the end of this universe and creating an arc to get into the next one when
Hmm.
presumably those curator moves go away. So the pocket universe should, in theory, go away. I mean, narratively, it'll still be around as a thing, but like, does he lose interest in it? Like a kid setting aside their Lego set because they've had it for a year and they're like, I'm too old for this. I don't care about this one anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
I think from my perspective, I think I've said like the presumed nemesis battle is something that I'm excited to see how it plays out and if it needs to be tweaked, that kind of thing. I think it'll work. One of the things that I do always try and keep in mind with this is there's a lot of like effectively theorize. And so like at what point is there just too much theorize? The final showdown has shifted to what are I think what are called encounters in the lands remaining to kind of like pull it away, like to make that like final thing feel a little bit more special than just another theorize.
Yeah, that's
So
smart.
part of me wonders about like changing the nemesis battles into an encounter that you then just plug the character into
Sure.
and see how it changes or develops based on having a unique character inside of it. Um, and then yeah, I mean, I'm excited to get us into Stud Caballo's Crime Palace, Criterion City. One of the concepts that we have is this idea of, I call them heist hubs right now. And because we've got these sort of like sectioned off acts of the heist, that like the perimeter could be the same across multiple heists, but there need to be more locations, kind of like filling out the city. So for at least the initial heist book, campaign book, Criterion City, which was where we're about to go, is going to be the heist hub. So we're going to see like a smaller version of it, and then we're going to go away. And then in theory, we will come back and explore. The crew will be able to pick some heists and then kind of like say, oh, I want to like, is there a place in Criterion City that I can go to get this kind of modification or this kind of thing? So you'll have kind of a bigger sense of the world for that sort of perimeter scouting out planning. And then you'll just do a mini heist attached to that. So I'm curious how that will work out, and we'll be on our way towards that in a few weeks. Yeah, and then a few new heists over the course of time too, and another persona being added in. But yeah, that's what I got.
That feels like a lot.
It is a lot.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot to test. A lot, yeah. Like this is the first time that I've done a long campaign. I mean,
Hmm.
we're not we're not into uncharted territory yet.
Hmm.
I've done I think three heists before, but we're closing in on it. So yeah.
And then just to make things interesting, you're introducing all new untested playbooks.
Uh huh. Uh huh. Lots of
So,
untested stuff
so
just going.
you're in this experiment, your control group is already pretty adulterated.
Uh-huh,
But
uh-huh.
everybody involved seems to be having fun, which at the end of the day, that's the important thing.
I have been told before, you are no scientist, Martins. And so,
What a weird thing to say.
you can tell from my methodology for this playtest of just like, oh, I'm just gonna keep throwing in new shit and see how it all mixes together. But
Hmm.
um, yeah. All right. We'll wave bye to the people at home. Thanks you all for sticking on the design diary. If it's something mentioned in the, if you have thoughts on it, if you have questions that you'd like in future design diaries or whatever, feel free to drop them into the Discord and I will chat through design thoughts and that kind of thing there, or keep an eye on those things, whatever the case is. Um, but yeah, otherwise, I'm trying to do these when we have sessions that just fall through to kind of like talk about like, oh, this is how I'm thinking about it from a design perspective, and maybe that's helpful if you're making your own CFB game or just interested in the development of this one. Anyway, I already waved bye, so bye.
We already said goodbye. What are you doing?